Hey guys, welcome to week 2 of the vlog of the table build. I'm going to get stuck in with some casting and building and touch on some painting this week, so let's get rolling. Right, what I've done here is I've taken the cast blocks for the paving slabs and I've glued them down to some chipboard, which is like the card at the back of any notepad, bulk buy it on Amazon, and I've stuck them down in 2 different layers. So you can see the flagstones that will be at the edge of the dock are raised up. I should have left a little recess here, but I miscut it. And putting them on these gives me large sections that I can then glue down onto the board. I don't want to glue the tiles directly onto the polystyrene, because this will probably not end well if the polystyrene chips or lifts off, but gluing them down to this large piece of card and gluing the card down to the polystyrene will make everything a lot stronger and a lot firmer for, longevity. So there'll be more coming this way, and I'll probably have to do another section up this end that's going to go along the front of the canal. That is this glue here. It's like an expanding polyurethane glue. It will expand slightly, so everything has to be weighed down. But what happens is it bonds incredibly well. It's super tough. And as long as you use it sparingly, you get an incredibly good joint. Pro tip that's lifted from the Hurst Arts website when it comes to putting the blocks down is to use a right angle of Lego bricks. Because it's a fairly firm fixed right angle, it doesn't move much, and it gives you the ability to push everything into the corners and to keep everything aligned. Once the glue kind of tacks up in the first minute or two, the blocks won't move around after that, so then you can just continue your way down the line. Okay, it's assembly time, and these sections have dried overnight with the layers of card underneath. Everything's nicely set. I used a really decent quality wood glue, so that everything is set really, really firm. I have got my Gorilla Glue ready to go, a little spray bottle of water, which helps activate the glue. And the best thing to spread things around, a child's glue spreader. Super cheap, really easy, and when the glue dries, you can just ping it and it peels off. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna apply glue to the underside of all the pieces, and then I'm gonna spray water along here so that it's ready to activate the glue. Put the pieces on, clamp them on with either clamps or some heavy objects. So I've got some old paint cans, things like that dotted around to sit on top. The glue does expand, so the worst thing that can happen here is a little bit of squeeze out over the edge, which I can cut with a knife. If I don't weigh them down, they will lift up slightly and everything will be a little bit wonky, or it will move off the edge. And the idea here is to keep these flush with the edge along this side and this side. So that there's a tough edge, because I will paint the edge with a glue, so that I can slide them in and out of the storage without them getting damaged, and when they butt up against each other, they won't break or chip. Right, here's a time lapse of me spreading the glue nice and thin over the pieces so you get nice even coverage, spraying the water down onto the surface that's receiving the pieces, and then I carry this on across the whole board and set them down with weights on top so it's nice and firm. Right, so this stage all done. This looks like a hell of a mess as all of the things are weighing down the tiles to stop them moving around. Hopefully from the time lapse that I did, you can see, one, it was super easy to move all the segments around, having glued them down to the card first. And also how thinly I was spreading the glue. It does increase in volume quite a lot as it swells up, so you've got to be careful not to use too much. Yes, it would give you a super strong bond, but it would also creep out between all the tiles. I think you can see here there's a little bit of creep out here where I joined the foam to the plastic. I don't want that between the 2 tiles because you'll see it bubble up, and when you dry brush them, it's going to show up really, really clearly. If there is any mistakes, it's not too big of an issue if they're here and there, because I'll just cover them up with some flocking or some form of damage, but I don't want it happening all over the place, and certainly not in large amounts. I've removed the segment where the mill would be so that I don't accidentally glue it to the table surface with any seep out here at the edges. It just was placed there so that I got the alignment correct, and I spilt some glue on it. So hopefully with sprayed some water, I can kind of see at the end maybe just how much it expands by. Right, I need to leave this for a couple of hours to set up, and for the glue to go off enough that I can lift the weights off and see how it fares. I've got a few bits of trimming to do here where I didn't cut the card to the right length, but I can sort that out with a craft knife afterwards. So now I'm going to be moving on to doing some casting while I wait. Okay, it's casting time. So here's a range of the materials that we need. I've moved my location over to a different part of my garage due to better lighting. I don't have any electricity in my garage, so I've jury-rigged some work lights to the ceiling. Quick glimpse of the shoddy setup, a peek behind the curtain, as Dave would say. And now I'm going to get on with going through a very brief overview of the casting. Again, I won't go into huge details because I can just reference the website that Hurst Arts have. What I've got is the mould itself, a scraper to even out the plaster after we've poured it, a mixing pot and scales to get the amounts correct, something to vibrate the board with. So I'm using an oscillating multi-tool because it's really good at vibrating the board. If not, you can just bash the back of the board with a screwdriver. That's what Bruce recommends. This is a solution of cheapo dishwasher rinse aid in water to help break surface tension, gets rid of bubbles, that sort of thing. Some water. I've got it warm-ish in a flask, about 40 degrees, because it helps this brand of plaster set up correctly, which is in this giant tub here. And I like to wear gloves, mainly because I don't get on with the plaster. It kind of irritates my skin, so you need something to keep you safe if you have sensitive skin. If not, just crack on as is. Another time lapse here of me doing the casting process. You can see it's fairly straightforward to follow the steps by mixing up the plaster. I've sprayed the moulds with the rinse aid. I'm just pouring it in and letting it flow. As much as I'd like to appear clever, I got the amounts just right because I've pre-measured everything. Having done these casts lots and lots of times, I know just how much plaster is required to fill the mould, and you just have to overfill it slightly so that the plaster sits above the pockets in the mould. And this is because what we're going to do is we're going to leave this until this timer goes off. That means the plaster will be half set. So it'll be about the consistency of like a really soft ice cream. And what we will do is we'll use the scraper here to go over the top of the mould in two different directions at an angle. This takes all the material off the top of the mould and leaves a nice flat bottom to the pieces. So this means when you stack them, they're nice and smooth. So they're nice and flat on the bottom. Here's a pre-cast one. And so that when you're stacking them up and they go to certain heights or you're building them, you know, they put these flat on the ground, they'll be exactly the same height for flagstones. Here's just a quick clip of me using the tool to vibrate the board. Again, you don't have to use anything fancy here, just whacking the back of the board with a reasonably heavy screwdriver or something similar will do the job to bash the bubbles out. Okay, the alarm's gone off, so it's time for me to scrape. So what I do is I use one of these decorating scrapers like this. And first of all, just pass across the top, shuffling it backwards and forwards, just in case it's set up a little too firm and needs the surface breaking up like this one actually has. Because the setting time does change depending on how warm it is, so you have to keep an eye on that. So scraping across, and I'm scraping at this angle so that it is not putting too much pressure on the mould, and I'm also doing it at a slight angle so that I don't dig into any of the pockets by accident. So final pass that way, final pass that way. And then what I'll do is I'll get down at eye level just to check that it looks pretty smooth. Everything's looking good. So I will now leave that in the mould for about 20 to 25 minutes while I do other castings. And then it'll set up enough that the bricks can be popped out. Worth noting that I'll do 3 of these at a time. So I'll usually turn this and have like 1, 2, 3. That's just about enough that I can get a good mix of the plaster without it being lumpy. And it's fairly efficient because you can scrape 3 in just about the right amount of time. And then I'll rotate them through. So I'll get this one to the point where I've mixed the plaster, poured it, vibrated the table, put it off to one side with a timer on it, move on and do the next one. Do the next one. I can get through about 3 sets before I'm then going back to scrape the first one, and then scrape, 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 let everything set up, and then leave it for 20 odd minutes. And then pop all the bricks out onto trays. I use more of these cheap pound shop chopping boards because that way you can scrape the plaster off. It doesn't matter if it gets damaged. And then I put them on a cheap pound shop oven tray and put them in the 100 degrees in the oven, 100 degrees C, for about half an hour just to thoroughly dry the bricks out, and they will set to full hardness over about 24 hours. These have been sitting now for a while and the plaster is completely set up, so these moulds still stay super flexible because they're made of silicone. What I do is I just bend it this way and bend it that way, and you can see the bricks are already starting to come out. and I just very carefully lift them out. And then I would normally do this on another chopping board or straight onto a baking tray and try and line them all up in their little sections for each mold, and then pop them into the oven to bake dry them, and then they go into a storage box once they're nice and dry. Right, time to move on to painting, and you'll see why these blocks are so good, because they're super easy to paint once built. This is a corner piece that is going on the table revamp that I'm selling. I'm using it as a testing opportunity for everything I want to do on my big board. I can already see that I didn't glue these together very well because there are some gaps, but then it's supposed to be a ruin, so it kind of fits the aesthetic. This has been sprayed black, and then I have gone over it with 2 thin layers of this nice dark black, grey colour that I've got going on. This is a tester paint for a house paint. They make really, really good paints for painting these terrain pieces. So now I'm going to go in with this medium grey, and I'm going to overbrush it so that it picks up the majority of the detail and leaves the recesses nice and dark grey like this. Then I will dry brush it with this lighter grey, and then finally do a very light dry brush with this white. I'm using these stiff bristled brushes that you get from the Works. They are synthetic, but they've got good bend to them, and they're quite robust for doing dry brushing. I've used this one particularly for loads of different things, and they do a really, really good job. So let's get down to it. Here's a time lapse of me doing the overbrush, just wiping off excess, but not as much as you would need to for doing a full dry brush. And this is the dry brush stage, much lighter grey now, and being very careful not to get too much paint on the model, and then moved on to doing the white as a second layer of the dry brush to really, really bring out the details. That was a very, very fine coat, mostly brushing downwards. Right, and there we have the outcome after a couple of dry brush layers, going gentler and gentler as you get brighter and brighter. Super easy effect to get the stone. And where there's 1 or 2 little errors, I will do a little bit of moss or something just to cover it up. I got a little bit too rough with the brush in 1 or 2 places and caught the plaster with the metal part of the ferrule. But other than that, pretty happy with a couple of minutes work. Okay, going to cap this video off with a quick view of this now that the glue's set. Everything is very sturdily held in place. I'm going to do a little bit of trimming here so that I can fit these under properly, and then I'll finish up all of these panels to go all the way around the edge. I'll paint these separately so that I get the brush to them carefully and then glue them in. And I will probably save painting this until I've done all the other city segments so that everything is the same uniform colour. I might try and do a bit of variation between these two with washes, but I mainly want all of these cobbled stones to have the same paint effect across the board. This is the mill piece put back in again. You can see how easily it fits into the space. This is the glue that I kind of just had a tiny bit dripped on there, and I don't know if you can see very well just how much it's expanded, but it's gone from being a very thin layer to like a mil or so high, and that's the expansion that I've had to be careful of to not creep up between the stones. But overall, pretty happy with how it's come out. I'll repeat this across the other sections once I've cast some more flagstones up. And then after that, I'll be moving on to the wall. So I'm hoping in the next video, I can show how I'm going to make a wall panel and make a mold to make copies, because casting all of these tiles in order to make the wall 6 inches high and all the way along the board in this direction will drive me crazy. So I'll be making a 4-inch wide panel that I only have to cast up 6 times to do an entire board section wall, much better than doing like 20 casts of the individual mold. So hopefully next time I can cover how I've done that quick mold easily at home and progress on with the project. So thanks for everyone who's tuned in to see how it's going, and hope to keep it rolling out as a log for myself and for you guys to see just how to tackle a big board in an easy and manageable way.